Scenario began to be written for the war in Ukraine. The Russian army switched to a narrower war in eastern Ukraine after abandoning its efforts to capture Kiev in April and had some success. Russian forces advanced, relying on brutal and indiscriminate artillery fire. They did this to gain space without caring about ruining cities. Putin tried many ways to make up for the soldiers he lost in the region. He sent the mercenaries of the Wagner Group to the region and convinced them from many Middle Eastern countries, especially Syria, to fight for him and brought them to Ukraine. He even made an agreement with the mercenaries and prisoners of militant groups that are not affiliated with any government in the Middle East and persuaded them to fight on the side of the Russian army in the war. However, his biggest move was seen as his ability to take Chechens to Ukraine. It is known how much trouble the Chechen warriors caused the Russian army in the 10-year war. At the same time, Chechens had proven their maturity in those years by destroying many Russian troops with limited soldiers. It was thought that, after the Chechens stepped into Ukraine, they would make a difference in the region. But the first shock for Putin came when 2 Chechen battalions joined the Ukrainian troops. In their statements, these Chechen battalions said that they did not forget what Russia did to them, and they never forgive them. After that, everything started to go downhill for Putin. While the unrest in the Russian army put Russia at a serious disadvantage in the region, the reflections of these unrest were also reflected in the Chechen warrior battalions. Clashes between Russian troops and Chechen troops appeared in the latest shared reports. Russian commanders were stunned after unintentionally eliminating one of their valuable special forces units in a friendly fire debacle, the report says. Kiev confirmed last month that it had launched its long-awaited counteroffensive in southern Ukraine. Oleksiy Arestovich, a senior advisor to President Zelensky, said that the Ukrainian army broke through the Russian defense in various parts of the front line near the city of Kherson. But he warned not to expect a quick victory and urged people to be patient. Considering more than a month passed since the counterattack launched by Ukraine, it was seen how confidently Kiev wanted to move forward. We can see that the counterattack is a slow operation planned to crush the enemy. Despite the breaking of news of the offensive by Ukraine's top command, reports of heavy fighting on the southern front continue to spread. According to the data we obtained, especially from satellite images, the Russian army has almost completely left the west of Dnipro. The Russian soldiers remaining in the region, on the other hand, started to surrender, expressing that they had been let down by Putin. And now, the pressure of the situation has affected the Russian commanders, who accidentally targeted their own troops during an intense conflict with their opponents. A Ukrainian fighter claimed that the Russian officer gave an artillery unit the wrong coordinates for the attack. While even this claim is shocking, there is also the possibility that the bombing was carried out against Chechens. One of the race's commanders gave the artillery incorrect coordinates in the Kherson territory. They destroyed special units of the armed forces instead of their positions. While this goal scored by the Russians infuriated Putin, it is also thought to be the source of the strained relations between Putin and Kadyrov in recent days. Although Kadyrov is loyal to Putin, he also takes care of the interests of Chechnya and cannot accept that his own people die for nothing. Kadyrov harshly criticized the disintegration of the Russians by the recent Ukrainian sudden raid and lashed out at the inexperienced attitude of the Russian army. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov made remarkable statements after Ukraine announced that it took back more than 3,000 square kilometers from Russia in its counterattack in the east of the country. Kadyrov said that the Russian army needs to change tactics immediately, or he will inform Russian President Putin about the situation. As Russia enters the 9th month of its invasion of Ukraine, Kadyrov criticized the Russian army after Izium, a critical supply center in eastern Ukraine, passed to the Ukrainians. Kadyrov said if changes are not made today or tomorrow regarding the special military operation, he will have to explain the situation on the ground to the Kremlin. These are statements that should be taken very seriously, because it shows us the cracks that the Russian army is in. I don't work in the Ministry of Defense, and I'm not a strategist, Kadyrov said, but I can see the errors here. It's obvious they made a mistake. I hope they can draw the necessary results in a short time. While claiming that Putin was not aware of the situation with these words, Kadyrov also implicitly threatened the upper echelon of the army. Regarding the situation in northeastern Ukraine, Kadyrov said, "We have men there, fighters specially prepared for such situations. We expect 10,000 more to be added to them. We will reach Odessa as soon as possible." However, these are scenarios suitable for the wonderland that Kadyrov has created in his own fantasy world, because Chechen fighters have only been used as bait for artillery shells in Ukraine so far, and this triggered the Chechens' grudge against Russia and Kadyrov. In this regard, it is also spoken that the possibility of a revolt in Chechnya will be higher with each passing day. The Chechen leader also told the last soldiers he sent to Ukraine that they must defend Russia until their last breath. This funny explanation does not seem to satisfy the Chechens. An estimated 8,000 of these brave and devoted sons are Chechen men, an ethnic minority group originating from Russia's North Caucasus. Many of them are blackmailed or forced to enlist, while the rest are from Kadyrov's elite private army. Despite these differences, all Chechens share a common history marked by Russian colonial oppression and violence. At the same time, another serious statement of Kadyrov was published, and with this statement, Kadyrov accepted his losses in Ukraine. The Chechen leader acknowledged high casualties among the troops in Ukraine. He said that 23 of his fighters were killed and 58 wounded in the artillery fire of Ukraine. The Chechen leader admitted that Kiev troops suffered high casualties in their ranks after artillery fire, acknowledging the rarity of troubles on the battlefield in Ukraine. Earlier this week, one of the Chechen troops was bombed in the Kherson region. Kadyrov, a prominent ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin and the ruler of the Chechen Republic, told Telegram late on Thursday. The Kremlin ally seldom discloses defeats, but acknowledged that losses among its fighters supporting Russia were great that day. In fact, even if we act only from this point and try to calculate the losses statistically, we can understand the difficult situation of the Russians and Chechens in Ukraine. Considering the gloomy statements of Kadyrov, who was one of almost 100 soldiers in one day, it is seen that he sent tens of thousands of his soldiers to death on Ukrainian soil. Earlier this week, Ukrainian sources reported that a Chechen unit in the Kherson region in southern Ukraine disclosed its location through photos and social networks, which resulted in it being hit by artillery fire. Kadyrov's comments were unusual given that pro-Moscow forces rarely acknowledge large battlefield losses, and Russian officials do not publish figures on their own casualties. The Chechen leader also urged his compatriots to mobilize for the war in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian war more than 8 months ago, Kadyrov has stood out as one of the most ardent supporters of the conflict and has sent his own troops to Ukraine. However, he regularly criticized the Russian army leadership for being too soft, often together with Yevgeny Prigozhin, the financier of the mercenary Wagner units. Kadyrov also called for the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine. In this respect, we can see Kadyrov as the expression of Putin's madness. However, no matter what, the president of Russia in some cases cleverly feeds this madman and intends to use him much more powerfully. However, for Putin, the use of Chechen bouncers may have reached the final point, because an interesting rebellion movement is observed in Chechnya. Russia is known to be weak, and the first spark could be ignited anywhere at any time. Russia can take advantage of this weak situation, and brave Chechens can regain their freedom. If such a front opens, it will mean the end of Putin and his army, because they can't even properly advance the war in Ukraine.